Today on the Making Strides podcast, we have our first ever guest, Ty Mangum, sports scientist and endurance coach. We picked Ty's brain about running at intensity and interval training. This episode is jam-packed full of actionable information that will help you get faster by helping you to understand why it's so important to run hard sometimes and how to do it. Ty is an amazing resource for the human performance community, and we're super excited to have him on the podcast. Welcome to Making Strides, a podcast aimed at empowering and educating runners. Our goal is to help decipher misinformation in the running world that can lead runners off their path to progress. With an evidence-guided approach, this podcast aims to give runners the resources they need to foster healthy, lifelong running from track to trail. I'm AJ Cohen.
And I'm Adam Schwert.
Let's make some strides. Hey guys, we're here. We're back again, Making Strides podcast, episode 10. I think episode 10, right? Double digits now. That's awesome.
I don't even know.
Yeah. So today we have our first guest. So it's kind of a special episode. We have Tyler Mangum, and he is going to give himself a little introduction here.
Well, thank you. My name's Tyler, also Ty, either work. Formerly I worked in research and exercise physiology. My background was in pulmonary physiology, how the lungs really work and adapted to exercise, how we got oxygen and efficiently got it to our blood, just in different scenarios. And that's where I started. And then when I moved to my master's at the University of Utah, I studied fatigue and how we got tired. So how you develop fatigue, what kind of happens to your body, and kind of how things go south as you progress through that process. Eventually, I worked a little bit with the sports science team at the Seattle Seahawks, consulted for a couple of years. And now I coach predominantly amateur runners, some cyclists as well, a bit of 50-50 depending on the day. But that's where you can find me. I'm up in Seattle, Washington as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And of course, we have Adam from Run Mental. Adam, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Just hanging in there, hoping this fire doesn't rip through the only major trail system we have here in Fort Collins, which it's like crawling up the backside of the hill right now as we speak. So it's pretty bad. Anyway, but besides that, I'm doing well. So today we're going to be talking about all things speed work or intensity work. And I think first it's really good to start by just defining that, because maybe not everybody knows exactly what that is.
Yeah, I'll even take it a step further back and talk about what training is, because training is really three things. And first of all, training is an overload to the system. So you're stressing it in a way that the body's not used to. But the overload can be defined three different ways. There's frequency, you can do it a lot. There's duration, you can do it for many hours or a lot of reps or whatever you're doing, or you can do it intensely. So intensity is what you're talking about. And those three components, frequency, duration, and intensity, all make up overloading the system. So you can really stress your body in whatever way you want, but you can choose any of those three ways to do so. And intensity, especially because we're talking about running, is usually defined as the amount of an effort that's so difficult that you can't generally sustain. So usually that's cut off as like a lactate threshold is a very common term, or like a constant pace that you can hold virtually indefinitely. But harder than that, or something that's really difficult to maintain, is usually considered intensity. And that's because you just can't hold it for forever.
Sweet. I think some of these terms are kind of thrown around a lot, and not everybody understands exactly all of these terms on the whole spectrum of intensity. But like from easy, right? We have like easy, and then we have, I guess some people call it like endurance efforts in between that and like tempo. And then we have threshold, and, and then there's everything all the way up to like critical velocity or whatever. But like generally, I guess, what are these main terms? And the two I feel like are thrown around almost interchangeably, but are probably not interchangeable, is like threshold and tempo. But like generally, like what's the difference between some of these terms, and why might that be important?
Yeah, threshold and tempo are generally used interchangeably. From what I've heard, everyone's kind of, uses them in a different way, I suppose. Yeah. But when we talk about lactate threshold, that's a very common running term. And that usually refers to an amount of energy that you're essentially, when you exercise, you have a balance of oxygen that you can get in and CO2 you can get out. And that's, if at rest, you can get a lot more oxygen in than you need and CO2 out, it's no problem. But as you get harder and more difficult, it gets harder to get oxygen in and you actually build up an accumulation of lactate. Lactate essentially indicates that you're tapping into an anaerobic system. So anaerobic means without oxygen, and aerobic systems means with oxygen. Now, when you get harder and harder exercise, the more you tap into anaerobic, it's not a black and white scale. It's very gray as you kind of like progressively get more difficult. And the more you sneak into that anaerobic threshold or beyond the level that you can reasonably maintain consistently, you just accumulate more and more lactate, more metabolites, and it just kind of goes downhill from there. So usually when people say lactate threshold, that's a nice amount of oxygen you can get in, and you can hold. Some people define it for 20 minutes, 2 hours. There's 4-hour thresholds. It's just gray, so in between there. And then anything below that or easier than that is usually kind of your quote unquote easy work. It's usually like 80% of your heart rate or below. It's different for everyone actually, but it just depends kind of the terms that you're using, but that's a good place to start. So intensity is usually the effort that, you're going to keep building up those burning things in your legs and you're going to have to stop eventually.
Totally. So, I mean, how would I know that I'm running hard enough, right? Let's say you give me a workout, you're like, we're going to be doing some intensity today. And you give me some intervals or whatever. How do I know, or what maybe are some common ways that people help define subjectively, objectively, how hard they should be running, and how might you approach that?
Well, all difficulties are related to yourself. Everything is in relation to how hard you can go. And everyone has a max effort. It doesn't matter if your max effort's a 10-minute mile or a 5-minute mile. Everyone's got a difficulty at the very top. And at that difficulty, generally you have a maximum heart rate. And a maximum heart rate is just defined as the highest your heart can get for about 15 seconds and hold it there. So that's 100% of your max heart rate. There's lots of ways to figure that out. But in general, it's related to the percentage of your maximum heart rate. So if your maximum heart rate is 200, then 180 beats per minute is 90% of your max heart rate. There's 80%. You can just calculate it that way. And that's a very easy and objective way to really note how hard you're going. And thresholds in general for everyone really will be a percentage of that max heart rate. It really depends on kind of who you are and how you're doing, but could it be anywhere between 80 and 92% of your max heart rate? So everyone's different in the amount that they can hold as well. The more seasoned and trained athletes are in the much higher percentage of their max heart rate, and the kind of newer athletes might hold a lower percentage of their max, but it's still difficult for everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What would be an example? Well, first off, I guess what I was thinking about was a lot of people are used to kind of just going online and putting in their age and getting like a age predicted calculation of their heart rate. I guess a lot of people don't know how to do like a maximum effort test, maximum heart rate test. And maybe that is like just the closest thing that people can use. But, do you have any thoughts there in terms of like whether that, or just in general?
Well, there's a couple ways you can figure it out. One is the way that they use in the clinical setting, or we use in the clinical setting, I should say. And that's a progressive ramp test. And that just means you effectively make it harder and harder every 2 minutes until you can no longer exercise anymore, and you record your heart rate. Obviously, if you do this on a treadmill, there runs some risk towards the latter stages because you're going to hit maximum heart rate. So you usually have someone there to help support you and make sure you don't fall off the back. But that's a very easy way. It's important that it's a 2-minute stage because the heart takes about 2 minutes to adjust to a workload anyways. So you can figure it out that way pretty easily. If you want to be a bit more practical and try it outdoors, you can do the same kind of effort on a track. You could split it into maybe, it depends how fast you're running, maybe 400 to 800 meter efforts and progressively try to get faster and faster until you also kind of max out. Or sometimes if you go hard enough during a race, you can just figure out that you hit your true max there. AJ, I know I've seen some of your data where you ran up a hill really hard. Sometimes you just hit your max and you can pull it out from there too. If you can't ever get above it, that's probably there as well. So lots of ways you can figure it out. The 220 minus your age doesn't apply as much to endurance athletes, the general public for sure, but in general, endurance athletes can hold much higher than that. But sometimes very different. It depends on the size of your heart.
Cool.
And there's a time frame for these tests too, right? Like obviously you don't necessarily want to be ramping up every 2 minutes for an hour, or only do it for 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, in general, it should last between 8 and 18 minutes. If you end before 8 minutes, you generally got there a little bit too quick. So maybe you're exercising too anaerobically and you stop exercising before your true max. And after 18 minutes, maybe you fatigued so much that you couldn't hit your max because you were holding sub max for too long. So I mean, that's a general guideline. Of course, you can hit your max heart rate after an hour or two, but the more fatigue you accumulate, it's harder to reach it. So yeah, but that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Is it that important to note that if somebody was training at a higher level and they didn't do a maximum treadmill test or heart rate test, that they were using an age predicted number, and then let's just say they found out after the fact that maybe their max heart rate was about 5 beats per minute higher than their age predicted, right? So then technically their target intervals, their target heart rate during their intervals could be just slightly off, right?
It's possible. I mean, when we talk about like a difference of 1 to 5 beats per minute, honestly, it's probably not going to make a huge difference in terms of the zones you're training at. But if it's like a 20 beat difference, definitely. And I've trained someone she was a 55-year-old woman who had a max heart rate of 185. And so her age predicted would have been well lower in the 170s. So that's kind of the more difference I'm looking at. But, in a 1 to 5 difference range, it's almost noise at that point. Sometimes your heart rate monitor can be sketchy too. So
yeah, cool. So the takeaway, I guess, would be for folks listening who obviously can't get a maximum heart rate test or maybe don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
They can totally use like a 220 minus your age type thing, get away with it. And then let's just say they want to really get serious about stuff down the road and they start working with a coach who wants to take them through that test, then they can do that. But in terms of actionable, like kind of advice for today, they can just use that age predicted and it's not a huge deal.
Well, I mean, if you're listening and capable of running your maximum effort outdoors or in, and you have a heart rate monitor, absolutely go for it. It's just one effort between 8 and 18 minutes with only 5 minutes of it really being awful. And just try it. You can try it on a hill, you can try it outdoors, you can try it on a treadmill, although that's less safe. I would probably start there. But if not, you can use 220 minus your age. I'm not a big advocate for it, but if you're comfortable going hard, then yeah, give it a shot.
Cool. And the last thing I wanted to say about this is, well, obviously I wanted to put in there real quick that if you have one of these wrist-based heart rate sensors, don't use that. Definitely get a chest strap. Make sure it's got a nice fresh battery in there too. But anyway, yeah. And so what about somebody like me? And now this year has been very different. So I've run more miles probably than ever, and it's all pretty much been flat. I have done relatively very little trail compared to in the past. But in the past, I've done almost the entirety of my training on trails, on steep trails. And so would there be a significant difference in my ability to test myself in getting my maximum heart rate if I use a track or a treadmill versus like running up Towers Road here in town, which is 1,700 feet in like 3.5 miles?
So there should not be a difference. Your max heart rate is your max heart rate, no matter the methodology that you get there. If I put you on a bike, that would be a different question because sometimes runners don't have the muscle adaptations to hit that max heart rate in different areas. So that might apply. But if you're running flat or if you're running hilly, I mean, it's easier to hit a max heart rate up a hill probably than it is going flat. But regardless, your max is your max, regardless of how you get there. So it should be fine either way.
Cool. Adam, I was going to talk about more so like specific zones. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about with that regard, testing and all that?
No, maybe just clarifying, because I know if I was listening right now, I'd be curious about this. So whether you're on a flat versus a hill, to get to max heart rate wouldn't really matter because your max is your max, assuming as you got to that effort. But as far as from getting from point A to point B on like a performance standpoint, would there be a difference, say in AJ's case, where he's been mostly on flats, even despite, maybe training hard, just because the terrain's a lot different?
Yes. So we were talking about what training is. There's overload, which we talked about frequency, duration, and intensity. Another component of training is specificity. That's meaning you're doing the events that you're actually training for and to do. And most people think, the easiest way to explain that is if I did a bicep curl, I wouldn't expect my quads to get stronger, right? Like that's obvious.
What, really?
No, it's crazy. But a lot of people also think, if you are cycling, that you'll get stronger for running, or running will get you stronger for cycling. And that is in part true, but it's not a one-for-one adaptation. That also being said, if you're a trail runner, and you're doing a flat course road race, and vice versa, or you're only training for one or the other, there are different elements of the muscles that you'll be stressing, and especially the impact and the ways that you kind of run in general, that do and do not carry over. To what extent, I'm not sure. But certainly when it comes to performance, if you're a trail runner, you need to be hitting the hills, you need to be hitting the trails. And if you're, doing road races, that you can certainly make them a part of your daily efforts, but predominantly that wouldn't be your medium of exercise because you need to be a bit more specific. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think, obviously, I don't think there has been any like studies on this or anything, but you hear of all of these super fast road and track, like short and middle distance runners that transition to trail running, and they're super fast automatically at the trails, like automatically. But the more that they do the trails, the better they get at trails and the slower they get on the road fast races. So, that training specificity for sure. And I hear it a lot. Like you hear it, I've just heard it in multiple scenarios, just following a lot of different coaches and athletes and stuff like that. And obviously, like I said, it hasn't been measured, but that's probably a good example, I guess.
Yeah.
What about like the specific range? Because like back to the initial question, if I'm like a newbie runner or not even newbie, but like I haven't done a whole ton of intensity, and I work with a lot of trail and ultra guys and gals, and a lot of the recreational trail and ultra folks, they just like don't do any intensity, and they do it secretly. They do it secretly because a lot of them have pace management issues and effort management issues on trails, and they end up getting some intensity without actually wanting it. But when it comes to structured, specific workouts, not a lot of them do it. So let's just say we take one of my athletes that, before they started working with me, like what would you say to them in terms of what are they targeting? Like we've talked about heart rate, and I know like I use a lot of RPE type stuff. And maybe some of them have heard of like the Steven Seiler numbers are thrown around a lot. They may not know who he is, but like those numbers are thrown around. But what are you more so concerned or focused on with somebody and getting them to really hone in on how hard they need to run?
Yeah, it really depends on kind of honestly how fit the individual is, because different fitnesses are limited in different capacities to how hard they can exercise. And that's not to brag, but that's actually a paper that I authored in the Journal of Physiology in 2016, was looking at what limits exercise oxygen intake for trained and untrained individuals. And the way we did it is we did a VO2 max test in the mitochondria. So we actually took people's muscles out of them, run the VO2 max through the mitochondria. We did it in the quadriceps without heart rate. So we stressed a single leg, and then we did whole body VO2 max tests. And so we saw which one was the limiter in trained and untrained individuals. And in untrained individuals, and that's fairly untrained, so I'm assuming you're talking more the middle ground, people who are getting into it. But in general, those individuals are limited by the amount of mitochondria in their legs. And so that means effectively, they need to essentially just kind of train more. They just need to keep moving. And this is really why you see people who start to get into it can drop their mile pace from like 12 minutes a mile to 8:30s in 6 months or a year, where I'm trying to get mine from a 6 minute to a 5:55, and it's really difficult. But the fitter you are, the more you're limited by how much your heart can pump out in a given minute. That's called your cardiac output. And to increase that, to make your heart be able to pump out more, that means you generally need to include more intensity in your workouts. So the fitter you are, the general more intensity that you need to include, the less fit that you are, the more you just need to physically do the exercise. But that being said, when you are in that middle fitness to getting super fit, AJ, I consider you super fit, Adam, yourself as well. But if you're running, an hour and a half marathon or a 3-hour full marathon, that's very fit. Anything beyond that obviously is fit as well. But you do need to, independent of how long you're exercising for, if you're training for an ultra, if you're training for a full or half marathon or even a 10K, you do need to incorporate more intensity in the upper heart rate zones of 88 to 94% max heart rates for at least 15 minutes in a given session, at least probably up to 2 times a week as well. That's because when we stress our heart, we think, when we're training, that your muscles are the things that are training, but we can also make our heart stronger by effectively keeping it in those high zones. And that makes you more efficient. And when you're more efficient, when you're doing your long runs, you can kind of sustain that lower heart rate for much longer. And that's how it really translates to the ultra runners. So pretty important for the fit individuals to include intensity.
Cool.
Now, obviously, that leads us kind of into one of the questions we had lined up for you. Mm-hmm. Is there a point where that 15 to 20 minute window wouldn't be enough, or a situation where it would be too much?
So if in fact you could, and I worked with a guy named Ivan Wang, who was the Norwegian author on the very famous paper that found that the upper heart rate zones were 88 to 94% max heart rate. And he told me effectively, if you could train exclusively there, you would. Like, that is the zone for you to train at. And if you could train there for an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours, you will become exceptionally fit. Now, what happens if you hold 90% of max heart rate or 88 for a half marathon? AJ, you just did this a week ago or 2. You might be a bit sore the next day, right? You might be a little tired. You're still feeling it, a week or 2 later. And so ultimately, AJ's fitness was probably great for the next 4 or 5 days after the race. Physically, like aerobically, you're pretty fit, but your body starts to actually sustain a lot more damage the more you hold these higher heart rate zones. And so it's really finding a balance of how long can you stay in 90% of max heart rate and still work out tomorrow and still work out the next day. And if you look at, I'm going to butcher his name, but like Kipchoge's, I think that's how you say it, his training log, which he made public, he would do 10-minute efforts times 4 times 5 in these zones, because he could hold 50 minutes at 90% max and still run 22 miles the next day. So for him, obviously it's not enough to do 15 minutes. For cyclists, I'm not sure how many cyclists listen to this, but you don't incur as much systemic damage as running because you're not continuously pounding your knees and shins and going up and down hills. So cyclists can hold for much longer as well. And the fitter you are, you might be able to bounce back because everyone can adapt differently. But for us 3, who I'd consider very fit, not elite, it might not be enough For those who are the 2-hour marathoners, 15 minutes at 90% certainly isn't enough. But it really depends on how fast you can bounce back for your next exercise. So it's a balance.
Yeah, and I was going to bring this up before because, as PTs, Adam and I are really thinking, I wonder what this person's tissue capacity is like. What's their history of injuries, their frequency of injuries? Do they have injuries they're coming off of? What types of injuries are they? Or they have the, calf and Achilles complex, because that's going to affect maybe how we prescribe our workouts and stuff like that. And I know, so Adam just wrote an awesome blog on why maybe a PT who's also your running coach, why that may have some advantages. And I think that might be one, is we're always thinking about like, what is this person's tissue capacity like? And because that's ultimately, we're stressing our body. Yeah, we're stressing our heart and lungs, but we got to remember that our tendons are when they're starting to break down, we got to back off, because if you're injured, you're not doing any speed work or running sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
So, going to this list of questions that we have, that we've kind of been, I think we have a pretty good flow so far, but this first question we had, we could probably talk about a little bit, which maybe maybe we'll see how repetitive this is, but basically we've heard these numbers thrown around a lot, the 88 to 92 or 94% of someone's max heart rate as sometimes this target for these intervals. And then that 15 minute, or more, obviously a minimum of 15 minutes maybe to get this overload stimulus, but obviously we talked about when you might do more. So that we talked about, but that 88 to 92%, from my understanding and what and you're just obviously way more versed in this, but my understanding was that it's usually more advantageous to try and target that type of around 90% of your maximum heart rate zone for a longer period of time, rather than hitting high 95 to 100% of your maximum heart rate for a shorter period of time? Or is that potentially a wash in terms of gain fitness?
Well, there's no benefit of being above 94% max for a couple of reasons. But first, that's been extensively studied, is do those higher heart rate zones help contribute to aerobic fitness? And the answer is no, not more so than the 88 to 94% range. So there's first, that it kind of answers like, totally. Should you go above? Probably not. The other thing, if you go above 94% max, which we all often do inadvertently or purposefully, is that usually restricts your ability to continue exercise. And if you hit your max, or if you hit what's called like a red zone where you can't like recover fast enough to work more, then your workout's effectively done. And so you've got to think about, it's really just a simple math game at this point. Can I do 20 minutes at 200 beats a minute? Let's say, can I do 4 minutes at 200 beats a minute, which is, I don't know, whatever that number is, 8,000 beats. You'd multiply whatever minutes by total beats. Math. God, I'm a physiologist, not a math guy. But can you do 4 minutes at 200 beats a minute, or would you rather do 20 minutes at 180 beats a minute? And so if you do that math, the total amount of work in the lower heart rate, which is still as efficient, makes way more sense. And that's really the simple part of kind of finding that range. But when we're talking about like 88 to 92% or 88 to 94, we're thinking about aerobic zones. And this is usually who I work with, AJ, you work with. But Adam, you're actually a unique case, because sometimes you work fast enough that you actually tap more into your anaerobic if you're doing 800 meters, even 1500 meter workouts or races. But for aerobic athletes, for anyone 10K and above, even 5K and above, but mostly 10K and above, that's the zones that make the most sense. For anaerobic athletes, those who do 5Ks and need fast kicks, 800s, 400s, well below, makes no sense to be in these zones. It makes more sense to be harder workouts, because that's the specificity that they need.
And I just wanted to touch on how you mentioned maybe going too high, doing an interval too hot is going to be, it's going to ruin your workout. A quick anecdote on that is, like, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to hit this Strava segment trying to get King of the Hill or whatever, and I missed it, and I didn't even get it, and it destroyed the entire rest of my run. Felt
It
like
does happen.
crap. So, but like transitioning into, if we are doing intervals, let's just say we're doing a classic 4x4, right? 4 minutes at intensity. Let's just say 4 minutes rest 4 times, right? If you are doing those intervals, and sometimes so is there a best way to execute those and I'm kind of coaxing you into a certain answer, because what I want to kind of talk about is what would be an effective execution of those intervals, and what maybe commonly kind of happens that you see that isn't the best way to do it.
Yeah, well, the point of any interval is to be in a zone or a speed that you couldn't theoretically sustain otherwise well, maybe you could, but if you did, it would cause too much damage. And the point is to really be in that zone. And so when you do get there, the goal is to not get there too quickly. It's not to go too hard and to go above it, which often, that's how most people can start a race. That's how I've started races in the past, is that they can push it a bit too hard. And then you're no longer able to kind of get to those zones in the latter interval sessions that you're working with. So that's the first and foremost thing to consider. And really the rest in between, it's really kind of up to you. If you want 4 minutes off, there's actually quite a few studies around RPE showing it's just as effective to kind of go based on when you think you're ready to kind of go for the next round, which on average is 3 minutes. So it doesn't really make a big difference. But ultimately, it's kind of up to you and your athletes when they want to get to there and how they want to be there. But just when you do pace it, make sure your first effort or your kind of consistently at a neutrally difficult split, with the hardest one kind of at the end if you do make it hard. But that's only because if you go too hard too soon, you run the risk of not being able to get back to those high heart rates. That's really the goal of the workout.
Yeah. I feel like most of my athletes and myself sometimes, and even knowing what I know and trying to be so mindful, I will sometimes do that first one just slightly faster than I intend to. But then the rest of them are pretty spot on. But sometimes I just feel like it's almost too easy feeling. But I look at my zones afterwards and I was a little bit high or whatever, which I guess it doesn't matter because it didn't ruin my workout and I was able to recover and I was able to execute. But I actually had a situation the other day with a client who did her first interval very, very fast, and she did feel like it ruined her workout. So I think that's something to be mindful of.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us. I mean, the problem with the first interval is that you often come in cooler, obviously, than the second, third, and fourth. And when you come in cooler, you go into what the term's called oxygen debt. So you actually, when you start exercising at a very hard intensity, you probably feel good for up to 90 seconds. That's because you're kind of relying on anaerobic energy. You feel like you can do it. You feel like you're super strong and you just want to go that pace, but you're not getting enough oxygen to how fast your muscles are going. And that can often lead to some catastrophic results in the latter 2 minutes to the next few bleed overs. But yeah, pacing it wrong is just a part of running, and then adapting to the next time. And sometimes you blow it so hard on the first one, we're in a Strava segment like yourself. And then it's just, chalk it up for a loss, go for the next day. That's okay too. It does happen. And it happens to me. I mean, it's just practice like anything else.
Totally.
So that would be why we strive for our final interval or the end of the race to be the fastest portion, rather than going out too fast, kind of tanking and then spending, time trying to recover, that you could be running a more even pace.
Yeah, I mean, tons of research, tons of data analytics on kind of perfect pacing. And really for anything above 800 meters, the neutral to negative splits. And by negative, people usually think, like 5 minute differences, but it's often, within a minute or 2 minute swings from half marathon to even full marathon. But neutral splits, negative splits, meaning you run the back half faster, is really more optimal, mostly because of kind of the energy systems that you do tap into and the amount of damage that you accumulate. And if you hit that early, and if you hit that red zone, meaning too much systemic damage is in your muscles and you can't kind of clear out the lactate and the things you need to clear out, yeah, it will lead to very negative results. I think every single competitive runner has had one of those races in their lives. But yeah, it's easy to show pretty quickly, because then your heart rate can't even get back to the threshold. It just kind of tanks off and you're toast.
So in duration of intervals and how short they can be and stuff like that is this question that initiated our initial discussion through Instagram. And then I was just like, wait, why don't we just have you on the podcast? And here we are. Mm-hmm. But we talked about this, but do you want to explain really quickly maybe, and we touched on these concepts already so far, but so it'll sound familiar to the listeners, but can you explain a little bit as to maybe what might be some of the shortest intervals that you would prescribe for folks? And obviously people who are working more in an anaerobic system, that would be different, and stuff like that, which we talked about already. But, and then, what maybe are some of the longest, intervals that maybe you would prescribe?
Sure. So aerobic, we'll start with aerobic athletes, and I'm defining them again, 10K or longer. In general, I prescribe 2 minutes at the very shortest of the interval range, and usually up to 10 minutes of the longest. But you can, to be very clear, you can do very short intervals, but let's take it back to the original goal, which is to sustain a very high heart rate for a very long amount of time. And the same famous study that found 4x4s are really efficient in training aerobic studies actually did 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, times like 65 to match the 4x4s. And they found nearly comparable, but not as close, but very comparable, like statistically, equivalent gains in aerobic fitness if you did 64 15 second on, 15 second off efforts. And that's because the total high heart rate was still in that high range, of course. So you can do that. Now, if you're going to do a short effort, less than 2 minutes, just make sure to do a lot. But again, it doesn't quite make that much sense for me, at least, to prescribe those if you can get the same amount of effort in a more consistent manner. I like 2 minutes because the heart rate takes at least about 2 minutes to adjust to a workload. And by that, I mean, if you're running a 6-minute mile pace, within 2 minutes, your heart rate will be at the zone it needs to be there. And usually I prescribe 3 minute, 4 minute, up to 6 minute efforts, because then you've already done the work to get to the zone you want. So why not just hold it once you're there? You've crept up, just hold it once you're there. And that's really kind of the goal of the interval, is to stay at that high heart rate. If you're doing below 2 minutes, you're probably not going to get there. Meaning you're going to have to shorten your rest, do it again, shorten your rest, do it again. And that's, for an aerobic runner, you can. We saw somebody do I don't know, how many was it? 100 by 200 meter efforts. And sure. But it makes just as much sense to do 6-minute efforts and much shorter in that range. And if you want to do 3 minutes, 6 minutes, or 10-minute efforts, totally up to you. It's, again, about finding the balance of how much damage happens, staying in the right zone, finding that sweet zone for you and your goals, and going from there. But that's usually the golden range that I put it in. Above 10 minutes, you start to approach very threshold and tempo efforts, and those are zones that you can hold for indefinitely. And that's generally not the point of an interval. So I don't usually prescribe longer than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Cool. So for someone who's more in my wheelhouse of 5K below, mm-hmm. and we're not going to get up to that benchmark for the heart rate, how might you advise someone, looking at that intensity? Is it just based off goal race pace stuff? Is it RPE?
Yeah, the 800 up till especially the 1500 are exceptionally challenging races, because you have to tap anaerobic and aerobic systems. The 5K is pretty aerobic, you can do just a consistent effort and you probably get away with it with some fast kicks at the end, depending on the race itself, but generally it's a neutral. So in the lower ranges, the 800s and the 1500s, that's where you really do need to tap the efforts that are independent of heart rate. And by that, I mean 800 meters or shorter sprints. And I'm saying sprint because I'm a marathon type guy, but 800 meter efforts in no means a sprint. A 400 meter, a 200, and even a 100. And those efforts in themselves rely more on kind of the neuromuscular adaptations independent of oxygen. So you don't really care about heart rates. You just care about your muscles being able to move quick enough independent of oxygen. And that is a really hard balance, especially with 1500 meters or 800, more 1500, but because you have to also still have the aerobic capacity to do that at the end. So you have to find a unique niche balance. It's a really delicate elements of coaching with those kind of quick pacing running. But then it's really up to you in terms of like how you adapt and what your strengths are. If you don't have the aerobic side to even get to the finish, then you focus more aerobic. If you have a strong kick, like Matt Centrowitz was really famous for having a strong kick at the end. He did a ton of anaerobic work. At least that's my guess. But he was exceptionally fast over 400 meters. He could just get there, but he wouldn't win the very fast races. So yeah, it's really a fine balance.
I see a lot of half marathoners, ultra marathoners doing these hundreds, 200s, these like track workouts and stuff. And I mean, is that just not the best use of their time?
Makes no sense to me. You can, if you're going to do them, I mean, it depends what your goal is, right? If you're a marathoner doing 200-meter efforts, my very first marathon, I had a PhD friend he's at the Mayo Clinic, and I was doing 400-meter efforts like times 10 with full rest in between. And he asked me why, like, what's changing? And I was like, I don't really know. And he's like, well, we got to focus on the systems that help get you to the finish line. If you're not going to tap anaerobic, then why are you training anaerobically? So I took that to heart. And, there's a difference between doing strides and working on form and kind of that fast turnover to just do it, at the end of the workout because it feels good, because you want to run properly or what have you. But doing a 200-meter effort or 400 for a marathoner, you just don't see that in the elite athletes, in the distance athletes. And you don't see it in amateur athletes very commonly, because that's really you're not going to tap into that 200-meter effort ever during your marathon. So why tap into it during training?
Yep. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I see a lot of these same athletes also doing, like, it's just crazy because I see them doing a lot of these shorter efforts like we're talking about, and then I see them doing these sub-threshold efforts where maybe they're at like 85% of heart rate max or something like that, and they're holding it for long periods of time and doing a lot of their training at these like race paces, which I guess it would be like a race pace type, maybe depending, like if they're a marathoner or ultra marathoner. And so I know we have a question here about race pace specificity, but I mean, if that's, once again, like, is that the best use of their time if they're skipping a lot of those VO2 max workouts, I guess you would call them, and they're just doing on the opposite ends, they're doing the shorter and longer workouts?
Yeah, so we've been talking about intensity as a means to increase aerobic capacity, how much your heart can beat, how efficiently you can exercise, but we haven't talked much about sub-threshold or longer distance efforts. For marathoners and long distance athletes, those are absolutely necessary. I mean, your muscles, usually your slow twitch muscle fibers, your what are called your type 1 fibers, and even the ones that help transition there, do need to get stronger. They do need to adapt to that blood flow. They do need to increase the amount of mitochondria in your legs, and they do need to transition to slow twitch fibers. So by that, I mean, your muscles will shift, especially your quads are a really good example. There's 3 different kinds of muscle fibers. There's explosive 2X, there's middle 2A, and then there's slow twitch, your type 1s. And depending on how you train and how long you train, and for how many years you've trained, your body will transition to whatever system it needs. The longer slow efforts, your base miles, your kind of threshold 2-hour, 4-hour things do help that transition, which helps increase the amount of mitochondria, and it does help you perform. So if you're going to be running a marathon or ultra or whatever, it's absolutely necessary to kind of still do those long, especially the slow efforts. Then incorporating a threshold effort, it's entirely up to you and how much you can recover and come back the next day. But they're absolutely needed, especially if you're going to be doing a 10-hour race. it makes sense to me to at least do an hour and a half at a good effort that's sustainable, because that'll help kind of get your muscles ready for the longer haul.
Yeah.
So is that something or what are your thoughts on layering that kind of work into your long run versus keeping it just super slow and easy and getting just time on your feet?
It comes back to that very first topic that we said, which is how much can you put your body through and still come back to the next day. If you can do a race effort every time you run, then absolutely I'm going to have you do that. But ultimately, most people can't do that because it causes too much damage. How much you kind of layer intensity worth easy. There's a really generic rule of like 80% easy, 20% difficult as your workout. It's called like the 80-20 rule. I'm not a huge fan of that, but that's a generic guideline. The more fit individuals usually kind of layer 70% difficult, or 70% easier sub-threshold and 30% more difficult above threshold, and really delicately, intricately finding a balance between those. But if you're going to do a long run and want to incorporate a threshold effort and get tired that way, I strongly recommend those, fairly often, but to the extent that I know you can still come back the next few days and still exercise. So it's kind of up to you. It's good to know what racing feels like. It's good to know your limits, but it's good to still come back and still do more work the next day. So where it really depends on the person at this point.
Gotcha. So there wouldn't be any loss from, adaptations that come from that lower intensity work when layering that in?
I hope not. It depends if you cause yourself a setback, I suppose. But no, I mean, there are more, I would say it's more beneficial. You'll do more work and you'll put your heart rate through more effort than if you ran at 80% of your max heart rate the whole time for 3 hours than if you did at 60% or if you walked, right? It's more work. You're kind of putting your system through more effort and it's still sustainable. But you don't want to continuously push that envelope to you're always trying so difficult that you can cause an increased likelihood of injury, or you're just approaching burnout because you're so fatigued and you can't come back the next days. So, I mean, there's points always to doing base miles at like conversation pace, generally trying to transition your muscles, generally trying to like get ready for the upcoming year and the build. And there's times where you should go a little bit harder. But it's kind of finding that balance and when you're at it in the season as well, if you can actually take that load on.
So I've asked you about this before, and we do not need to spend time on this, but because it doesn't seem like it's super important of a concept from the answers I get from you. But I mean, I've listened to like Sean Bearden on the Science of Ultra podcast, and he brings this up. He's brought it up a couple times. He has like a whole episode on it, on this whole, like, if you're running a lot of volume at intensities close to, but under, below like threshold pace, but like, creeping up against it, kind of tempo-y pace, then we're doing this like complex one bypass, where so I honestly don't know if I really understand this, and I've tried to maybe explain it to you through voice messages or texts, but basically from what it sounds like, because I even reached out to him for clarification, he sent me an article, and then I tried reading the article. It sounds like, so complex one is this respiratory kind of this respiratory function that we are performing when we're running and at a certain intensity, and then if we are running at a higher intensity, we're skipping this complex one, using this complex one. And then if we train a lot there, our body adapts to skip complex one, and then it can reduce our efficiencies at lower, easier paces because we are de-adapted. Our complex one is de-adapted. I could be totally butchering this, and maybe it's just something that's not super important, and maybe it's just an idea kind of theory at this point, but I don't know if you have thoughts.
I mean, I think the larger question that you might be asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just about efficiency in general. And efficiency is essentially how easily you do a specific amount of work in general. And that's usually defined as running economy. So that's how much oxygen you can get in for a given workload. And running economy is a very complex and genetically involved and training adaptations involved and strength. I mean, it's really, it accounts for approximately 40% of performance between an individual with similar fitness. And that's, I'll give you a really good example. A good friend of mine, I worked at the University of Oregon with the track team quite a bit. A good friend of mine was an All-American, multi-time All-American 1,500-meter runner. And he had the same VO2 max as me. And I am a mediocre to occasionally good cyclist with a 3-hour-ish marathon, and I could never run a 1,500-meter faster than 5 minutes. And he's running, 332s, 335s. So there's something component-wise that sets everyone apart and different from each other, and that's predominantly contributed to running economy or cycling economy. And that can differ based on genetics. It can differ based on training. And that's, when you see someone you've put in the same work as, and the work that they're doing, and they're just, fitter than you, outside of maybe a history of more running, it can be a lot of genetic or different determinant factors. I'm not entirely sure the referral that you were saying earlier, but ultimately, some people, unfortunately, I have some exceptionally gifted friends, and I'm sure you do too. A guy that we all know, his name's Chris Johnson, a very nice PT in Seattle, trains, the amount of hours that I do, and he is worlds faster than me. Worlds faster on the run, worlds faster on the bike, and he has 2 kids. Great guy, but very fit. But a lot of it has to do with economy and efficiency and history of exercise as well. But there's a lot of things that we can and can't control for, but we can only really focus on what we can work on. So.
Yeah, and I think obviously Sean Bearden's audience is all ultra runners, and ultra running is this weird realm where, moving into, I guess, talking more about the race pace specificity, where almost all of our runs that we run when we're training for ultra marathons are significantly faster than our ultra marathon race pace. And now, obviously, it totally depends on the runner and the fitness and whatnot. Like my 50K pace is pretty fast, relatively speaking, but like my 100-miler pace is is a lot slower. And so I am, and I know this, and I know the specificity of training concepts and stuff like that, but a lot of people I know training for 100-milers are running so much faster all the time. And so then maybe talking about adapting to your running adaptation, running economy, and specificity, maybe it comes down to, if you're running a lot faster than your race pace, the question is, are you fully adapted, and is your running economy optimized for your race pace? And then maybe if that's what Sean is trying to get at, then maybe he's onto something in terms of just slow it down a little bit.
I would probably, based on just thinking about what the difference is between 100 miles and a 50K, which is 36 miles
31
or so, 31, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm obviously not an ultra guy. To me, it makes more sense because when you approach 100 or say 200, or let's just say a 600-mile event, just for fun, you do hit a zone where, I'm sure the Western states or the whatevers, I know that's
100. Don't embarrass yourself.
The Appalachian Trail. Eventually, you get to a point where it's so long that it's no longer effectively contributing to aerobic fitness.
Totally.
And you're not stressing your heart in a zone that's even stressing it. You're just kind of actively moving quick enough that's considered, will sustain damage. And that's, when you think frequency, duration, and intensity, you take out those other two and you just focus on duration. There's probably a fine balance, especially with ultras. The thing with ultras is they obviously have to focus on that duration and be capable of maintaining that duration. Without that, you're not going to finish, but you do need to do so as efficiently as possible. That means keeping your heart rate as low, keeping your we haven't even talked about fuel, but the ability to kind of keep everything in check so that your metabolism, your lactate maintains a reasonable level. And that really comes from aerobic fitness. That comes from keeping your heart strong. It comes from keeping your muscles strong. And that comes a lot from intensity, but also just continuous efforts as well.
Totally. Yeah. And last relation to ultra running, because then we can move on, because that's not maybe the majority of people, but but you still need to obviously practice those slower. Well, obviously, ultra runners are probably running more volume. What maybe allows them to, hopefully, is that they're slowing down so they can get more volume in. And that is important because we talked about specificity of training and then your running economy for a specific effort. But then I don't want ultra runners listening to this podcast thinking that there is no place for speed work and intensity for them. And I think that it's so important to drive this message home that they still need to be doing these efforts in increasing their fitness in that way, because if you have a bigger engine, then when you're running a specific, like at a specific effort, that engine doesn't have to work as hard. So theoretically, then it would be able to move more efficiently. So for longer. But would you agree that these ultra endurance athletes, 100 milers, if you just ran the Moab 240 just this past weekend, if that's what you're training for, you can benefit from doing speed work and intensity work?
Yeah, you absolutely need to. It's just an effective part of really that overloading the system. And if you're only focused on frequency and duration and you kind of shun intensity, you're going to be very good at frequency and duration, but not doing it necessarily quickly. And my brother, he's in the ultra community, maybe not entirely, but has done 100, done a 50s, and he never does intensity. And that's a separate question, but you can't, and he'll finish. But it really depends on kind of what the goal is for you and your ultra runners. And if it is to finish, of those two things, I would definitely shun intensity because you have to get to the end. But if you want to do so efficiently, your heart needs to be strong enough that you stay in that kind of lower level zones as efficiently as possible. And that comes from intensity. Yeah.
Totally. For sure.
Yeah. We could even add on, a lot of the ultras are really hilly races. And, you're going to find yourself on either a long hill or a fairly steep hill. You're probably going to be hitting some intensity, during the race at some point. So it makes sense in your training to also hit that at some point, be able to recover from that.
Definitely.
Totally. And then with the concept of hills and technical trails in these races, the last thing that people forget too is that they end up hiking. And if the amount of runners I have to tell to hike in their training runs, like purposely pick runs like that, are specific to the course that they're going to be training on, but like if you're not hiking, you're not going to have hiking economy. So that's something too. Where do we go from here? Adam, did you have a transition from there? I have a couple ideas, but what do you have?
No, but we can just do something different. Or a little bit different.
I kind of want to talk about the ladders, right? Because that was your question.
That's where I was going to go.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, this is something because I like simplicity. I really do like simplicity in things. And I think that I find that people are more compliant and can execute better when things are simple. And then sometimes I see these workouts that people are doing and it's just like, 1 minute on and like 3 minutes rest and then 2 minutes on and then like 30 seconds rest and then like all this crazy stuff, or even if it is just like an evenly distributed ladder, like up and down, is there, I guess my question would be like, is there some sort of benefit to structuring, speed work like that? Do we get anything out of the complicatedness of that? And then I don't know if Adam has any extension to that question, but
yeah, it probably depends on the duration of the event that you're actually participating in. For most, again, the predominant goal of usually an interval for aerobic athletes is to be in that high heart rate zone that helps you benefit. How you do that and how you marry 200 on, 400 off, 600 on, 300 off, whatever, doesn't really matter. Sometimes it's kind of just prescribed to runners just so that they feel like they're staying busy enough that like, I'm a coach, I should kind of give you something fun, and there's your fun thing. And, I've had conversations about that as well, but like, there's not really a point That being said, if you're going to be someone who is going to do, I think like a Michigan workout is like a 1600, 800, 400, 200 or something, and you do it in that consequential order, as long as your slowest one's your first one, like the 1600, and the fastest one, the 200 is the last one, then you don't kind of interfere with the harder workouts at the beginning. That's fine. But really, if you want to do like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever, it's really just kind of that math equation we were talking about earlier. And if you want to balance those, absolutely. But if you are an athlete, Adam, especially, you're an 800, or I don't know if you're still doing 800s, but if you're doing those short efforts, you do need to be able to burn the aerobic candle and tap the anaerobic after. And that's really what these fast athletes do. So that makes sense for them to actually simulate that in some way, and close quick. So it depends.
Gotcha. So the Michigan is a workout I came across. I think I was in high school maybe, and I just never really understood it, because if I could be mistaken, I should have looked it up before we got on this call, but it's like your recoveries are like a mile tempo, and then you go back into an interval, something like that. And the intervals, change, and maybe they change intensity as they get shorter. But I don't know, is there additional benefit in getting that additional time at some intensity, or would it just be better to just rest and hammer those intervals?
It depends. If you're able to stay in that high heart rate zone and run during, then go for it. If it does interfere with your ability to be there, then more rest is definitely necessary. But a real common trap for high school, and this is usually because of a couple things, but one is the amount of runners that these coaches have to coach simultaneously. But a common trap is that they just prescribe the same workout to all these kids who are quote unquote distance, but everyone's rest and everyone's thresholds are different. So if you're prescribing a tempo to a kid who can only run like 2 miles, and they have to do a mile tempo and then do another 1200 meters, then you're going to inflict some like inability to stay in that zones later. So some people will need more rest, some might not. But if you can do it, if you could stay again in that high heart rate the whole time, then it's probably a good thing if you can at least bounce back the next day.
Okay. So similar discussion of layering in intensity to a long run. As long as you can recover and continue to not put yourself at risk for injury, then have at it.
Yeah, I mean, I usually cap it at the end, just because then you don't have to worry about it. But a very common difficult workout that I'll prescribe, especially for someone doing a half marathon or above, is 10 miles with a fast close for the final 3. And so I could do a kind of conversation pace for the first 7. The next gets up to threshold, the 9th is at threshold, and the 10th is sub threshold. And that's so that I don't have to worry about kind of that active recovery elements during a run to keep completing it. But I don't think I'd ever kind of sandwich that in the middle, because then you've already incurred the damage. So it'd be difficult to even do more. But yeah, that's usually where I kind of, that's that negative split elements. And I definitely feather that on the end.
So when it comes to progression, I think, how might somebody that you're coaching, how might you progress their, or even like, is there, like, how would you progress their intensity workouts? Is there efficacy to like a periodization approach? I also kind of already, we had thrown you the question earlier of whether or not there is something to having workouts be less specific farther away from a race and then more specific working up towards a race. And then like over time, over maybe a number of months, how might you progress an athlete in terms of their interval workouts, or is it just a function of they get fitter, so you make them hold these intensities longer?
It really depends on kind of the athlete's capabilities and their goals. And by that, I mean, if their goal is to finish the race, which could be an ultra, could be just your standard half marathoner to marathoner. And that's a very good goal, is to finish. Then it's about progressing to load tolerance and finish. Intensity is less of an equation, although I'm sure they have a goal time, but if it's the goal is to finish, then we'll get you there that way. And I can structure 6 months to a year just based on kind of progressive load tolerance, making sure that we don't get injured and really focus on strength in that sense. But usually for someone fit like yourself, AJ, it would be, there's a very common, term of base miles, which usually refers to, a good amount of workload at sub threshold or threshold, but not very intense. And the predominant goal of that is to transition your muscles to kind of be able to tolerate the load, but also get them in that slow twitch range. That process takes at least 6 weeks up to 3 months to kind of get you to a state of muscle adaptation to a longer event. And the longer that you're doing, if you're doing 100 miles, the longer those base miles will have to be. And so it could be 3 months, it could be 4 or 5, whatever. But once your muscles are kind of in that state of starting to tolerate it, and I work with a guy who runs 80 miles a week anyways, then it starts to kind of float in to the intensity starts to kind of get in there as well. Intensity is a double-edged sword because you do get fitter, but you also cause more damage. So the more intensity that you do, the more rest that you need to incorporate as well. And then it becomes a really fine balance of if you've already hit your base miles and you start to hit intensity. And I think Joel Friel is a really good author on this, is kind of the block situations where you could do 3 weeks on, 1 week off. It's about kind of like feathering more of those 15 to 25 minute efforts, even longer, up to 40, in those high heart rate zones, the closer and closer to the race, because aerobic fitness comes and goes very easily too. It can leave in as little as 2 weeks. So, if you peak the rest and if you peak the training and you kind of make it more difficult up into the race and you consistently run those base miles, then hopefully that leads to a very good race after 6 months or so. And you go from there.
So just to summarize, I guess, concisely, you would obviously want to progress the volume and progress your base miles. And then once you get to basically like that desired amount of base miles, then specifically to the intensity topic, you would layer in intensity. With each layering of intensity, there is a recovery burden. Right. So then, but there's also, with, assuming that this person recovers well and they're sleeping well and they're eating well, they're going to get fitter and they will get stronger too. So their tissue tolerance and their load resistance is going to increase, as well as their ability to efficiently hold these higher lengths of time at a certain heart rate that they're working at. Right. So then you would add more of that intensity in over time.
Exactly. And you can add intensity early, but the problem is the more intensity you add, the more rest you need and the less miles you'll do. And that kind of defeats the purpose of base. But you can do that. So it depends on the person's load tolerance. And if they're already at the 80 mile a week, then maybe they're doing okay.
Yeah. And I think what I do a lot, and I don't, maybe it's not best practice, but we're always learning, I won't throw somebody straight into doing, interval workouts and stuff like that. But if we are doing more of a building phase and trying to get more volume, I do like people, and it's fun too to have, it mixes things up, to have people do strides and start working on that, the running form and the running economy and all that stuff. But these are just, if, listeners don't know what strides are exactly, but basically just like 15 to 30 second, usually I pick like 20 seconds, intervals where you're running really fast, but not a sprint, like as efficiently and smoothly, as fast as you can run efficiently and smoothly. That's not a sprint, right? So throwing that in, maybe just like somewhere between like 3 and 8 reps of that, a couple of times a week or once a week at least. That's totally fine during someone's build up, right? And that would technically count as, I guess, some form of speed work. But
yeah, even if you did intervals once a week, that's one in every 7 days. I'm sure you're fine. It's small efforts, especially keeping people happy and changing things and not being bored. It's just as much part of the game. Yeah.
Cool. Adam, what do you got?
I got more of a fun one. If we want to start wrapping up soon. I know we've been on this for a while.
Yeah, go for it.
Who do you think would be able to hold that 90% heart rate? Maybe we kind of already answered this a little bit, or alluded to it. Would that be more of the ultra runner or more of the track runner who could hold that 90% heart rate?
The ultra runner for sure. I'm assuming your track is like 1500 or shorter. But the ultra for sure, they just have more type 1 fibers. Because the short track runners have to be able to explode at least somewhat. So that they're not going to be, exclusively slow twitch fibers. But the slower twitch you are, the more mitochondria you have. And the more mitochondria you have, the more muscle buffering capacity you have. And that means you're effectively able to get rid of metabolites easier, or at least recycle them. And the more you can do that, the more you can hold a higher heart rate zone, because it's going to kind of get in that threshold. But I have a cyclist right now who can hold 94% max heart rate. And that's the very upper limit of kind of exercise of what's tolerant. But if you're a track cyclist, I mean, you might not even get to that high heart rate. So yeah, it's usually the ultras that can hold a very high heart rate for a very long time.
Well, maybe we'll have to meet in Denver sometime, AJ. Hash it out.
Sure. Yeah, but I'd be curious as to, once again, the terrain at which I'm holding my heart rate at. Like, this is what we should do, Adam. We should meet at the incline, right? And I'll bet you, like next year sometime when I'm training for my 100 and I'm doing tons and tons of hills, that would be a good time where I know I'm really adapted and economical in the hills. But anyway, we meet at the incline, which is basically, it's like 2,000 feet of climbing in like 0.8 miles, right?
Yeah,
something like that. So we should see if, obviously see who can hold the highest heart rate for the longest for that, and then for something like flat, and just compare. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Or
when was that time frame?
I don't know. We could do it whenever, but I'm
actually really interested to see what I can do, like right after track season.
When's that?
When I've done a lot of really.
So
what's
like
that?
in the spring? So the end of the spring then?
Yeah, it's like in the spring, like maybe May.
Yeah,
time
sounds
frame.
Good. We'll make a date.
Yeah, after I've done a ton of aerobic work, just see what I can do on 2,000 plus stairs.
Yes, totally. Ty, you got to fly out and join us.
After the pandemic.
After the pandemic. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're talking 2023. 2023, see ya. Another fun question. What's your VO2 max?
In my heyday, it was, I think 73 or 74. Now, probably less,
Nice.
I used to train a bit more than I do now.
Okay. Adam, have you tested yours? You're muted, Adam.
Technically, yes. In our exercise physiology class, like my first year at PT school, but it was on a bike, and we started at way too low of an intensity, and I don't think we could really go off it by any means.
Oh, okay. I wasn't a runner. I was a wrestler. I hadn't really run at all in my life yet, and
I was a wrestler too, AJ.
Nice, sweet.
I was okay. I wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I was probably the same boat. I went from being really good in high school, one of the best in the high school team, and then like literally one of the worst in college. So they used to make fun of me. They used to be like, "Why don't you quit the wrestling team and join the cross country team?" Because when the coach was pissed at us, he'd be like, "Run to my house and back," which was like 6 or 8 miles or something like that. And everybody, I'd crush everybody, but I wasn't a runner by any means then. And in exercise physiology class, they used me as the subject, and I think it was 62 or something like that at the time. But it would be cool to have it done again. I have a buddy in town who he used to work in an exercise physiology lab here in town. He offered to test me once. I didn't take him up on it though. I should have. They're miserable.
Just a number.
It's just a number. Exactly. And it is not just like, it just does not define performance, right? So there's so much more to that. Anyway, cool. So I think we're pretty much, there was one other question. Do you prefer running or cycling?
Cycling, 100%. It hurts less and you see more stuff. So
yeah,
I'm definitely a cyclist, but I run because it's a good workout in an hour. I'm not too bad of a runner. And then I can relate to my athletes too, but I'm a cyclist through and through. It's just easier to run.
Adam?
And hurt. Yeah.
What do I prefer?
Yeah.
I'm more of the opposite. I really enjoy cycling, but running will always have my heart.
Teach their own.
Go ahead, Ty.
No, that's it. I was just going to say it really depends sometimes where you started, but I started cycling I was competitive for 6 years and then got to a point where, you need to put in 20 to 25 hours a week. And I had a real job at a point. And so if you're going to keep doing that, you got to make some sacrifices. So I started running.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I had the only time I've really cycled consistently was when I was injured with an Achilles tendinopathy back in 2016. But I obviously love running way more. But you said because you see so much more on a bike, but I argue the fact that like I can travel through the mountains so far and see so many things that people, even sometimes mountain bikers can't. Like I pass plenty of mountain bikers on the trail all the time. But so it's being able to see more, but in a different kind of environment, I guess, which may, depending on the person, be more conducive to running or moving on your feet at least. Anyway, cool. Adam, did you have anything else? Ty, was there anything that
full conversation?
Anything we should have asked you?
No, reach out at any time. I mean, I don't know. We can post, I don't know where this is going to be posted, but we can post a link, share my websites, just tylermangum.com. Fitness account, on Instagram, whatever. Just reach out if you have any follow-up questions. I'm around, available. Always happy to just chat about physiology and adaptations because that's really what I enjoy explaining and working in. So that's about it for me.
Sweet. We'll put all that information in the show notes. So thanks. It's been awesome. It's a huge honor to have you on here, and we're super thankful. So yeah, thanks.
Cool. Well, enjoy your evening, guys. Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, guys, we're gonna go make some strides.
Cool.
Yeah,
all right.
always.
Okay, see ya.
See ya.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick minute here at the end to thank you for taking the time to listen to our podcast all the way to the end. If you learned anything from us today, or if you see the value in this podcast, please take a second to share your favorite episode on social media. Another way to show your support is to give us a review on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you're using. If you have any questions about anything you heard, please feel free to reach out to either of us via any of our social media channels. All of the information with how to connect with us, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, our websites, email, all that information will be listed at the bottom of the show notes. Lastly, as a thank you for your support, for anyone who mentions this podcast, you can receive $10 off any service to work with either Adam at Run Mental or me at Up and Running PT. First-time clients only. Okay, guys, have a great day.